for tuning into Conversations with Dr. Yella. Happy New Year to all of you, and I hope you have a very progressive year. So, I want to start off by giving you a background about myself and why I started this podcast. I am originally from the Holly Grove area of New Orleans, Louisiana, where I was born and raised. I attended Warren Easton Senior High School, and I graduated in 2011 as valedictorian. I then went to Xavier University, where I majored in biochemistry and started my research career. I worked on a disease known as rhabdomyosarcoma. It's just a soft tissue cancer that occurs in teens. I finished up my Bachelor of Science degree in 2015, and from there I went to graduate school in Lubbock, Texas at Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center, and there I worked on a disease known as graft versus host disease, and that's a complication of bone marrow transplantations. And bone marrow transplantations are treatments that's used to treat patients who have different types of blood cancers, such as leukemia. So I worked on this, and I received my PhD in the summer of 2020 in immunology and infectious diseases, as well as molecular microbiology. From there, I moved to the East Coast, to Charleston, South Carolina, and continued working on graft versus host disease up until now. And now I am working on oral health pathogens and how they are involved in systemic health issues. So that is my expertise. And now I want to give you the reason why I wanted to start this podcast. So I wanted to create a platform where people could come to obtain the basic knowledge of the science behind different diseases. So if you or loved one are being diagnosed or have been diagnosed and you don't quite understand, this is a platform that you can come to understand the science behind the disease. So now that that's out there, I want to get into these conversations with Dr. Yella. So today I'm going to be focusing on coronavirus, COVID. Yes, that's what I'm focusing on. And I will not go into all the different aspects of it because it can go on forever. It's so much to talk about. It's so devastating of what's happening in our country right now with COVID. So I only want to just talk about COVID and how this virus infects our bodies and how our bodies respond. And that is, it's so much more I could talk about. That's all I want to focus on today for the sake of time and for the sake of your attention, for the sake of my sanity. That is what I'm doing today. Now, just a small disclaimer. I am not a virologist. I am not a COVID expert, and I do not want to convince you to get the vaccine. I don't want to sway you of doing anything you don't want to do. I'm only here to give you the science behind the disease. Now, I'd like to get started, and I'm going to be referring to my notes here to make sure I check off everything that's on the agenda. So you may see me looking back and forth, but that's only to give you everything that I know. Okay, I want to first start off by what is a virus. So a virus is a living thing. It is a pathogen that survives and thrives within a host cell. A virus has its own DNA, it has its own proteins, its own capsid, and sometimes it has an extra layer of protection known as an envelope. So a virus, whenever it enters a body, it can then penetrate a cell and make changes in a cell once it infects it. So how does it do this? So a virus has these proteins are surrounding it, and they are known as the spike protein. And in particular, in our lung, we have lung cells that has another protein known as the ACE2 receptor. And COVID finds it, and then it's able to attach to the cell and then inject its genetic material inside of our cell where it can make changes to our cell. Now, I just told you a lot of terms like protein and DNA and all that stuff. I want to explain what I mean by those. So all living organisms have a central dogma. So we all have DNA, which is the code for our genetic material, and it codes for all of our it codes for everything. And that is transcribed into a molecule known as RNA. RNA is a transcribed form that can be read, and the protein reads that. And the protein is what carries out the function of the DNA. So it's the expression of the DNA. For example, it's the expression of our eye color, the expression of our hair color. So that is what's a protein. So like I mentioned, COVID has a protein known as spike, and we have a protein known as ACE2 receptor. So you could think of the spike protein as the key and the ACE2 receptor as the door. And so that key enters the door to penetrate a cell. And that's where infection happens. So now I want to go into why is this happening now? So if coronavirus has been around for centuries, why is it just now becoming a problem? Let's just say that it has had time to figure this out. It has had time to create the special key to get inside, where it can benefit its own survival. In late 2019, we first started to see that this virus was replicating, and it was all too happy, and it was showing off, letting us know what it could do. And in the process, it killed the host, and in turn, it killed itself. Because a virus really wants the opportunity to survive within a host without killing it. So that's not something that it really wants to do. So whenever a virus is in an environment, like on a surface, for example, they readily accept residents in a host if you were to give it a chance. So this is why it's very important to disinfect surfaces, to wash your hands, to wear a mask, because these viruses are in a harsh environment if it's not actively replicating inside of a host. So as a virus replicates over and over, a change can happen. Whether that change is intentional or by mistake, it happens. And so let's say there's 2 changes every 10,000 copies. Those changes can then lead to new functions and new variants of the disease. And so these new functions can be something like more infectious, but less deadly. This is the case of the Omicron variant. And also, this is important because we have other viruses that can do this same thing, like the flu virus, for example. The flu viruses make changes to itself every year. And this is the reason why we need to create a new flu vaccine every year. Yes, I said vaccines. So let's jump into that. What are vaccines? So vaccines is a substance that is created to stimulate an acquired immunity through the production of antibodies. In order to produce a vaccine, there needs to be a specific target that we can generate a response to for the antibodies to act upon. And these molecules are foreign, so it's something that we do not have in our bodies. It's a foreign molecule. And so our bodies will recognize it as not its own, and it will recognize it as foreign and attack. So vaccines, that's what a vaccine is. So what are antibodies? It is a type of protein. Remember, proteins have functions. So this protein is made by a type of immune cell known as a B cell, which I won't get into right now. That is for another talk. But these antibodies are made in response to a particular antigen. And they can recognize and bind to the target, which is a virus, for example, and neutralize it, and then feed it to the cell that will get rid of it. And I have a schematic of that. So you can see here, this is the virus. Don't talk about my drawing, but this is the virus. And if you have antibodies present, these antibodies will bind to that virus before it has a chance to infect the cell. And once it is neutralized, it can then feed it to this big master cell here that's going to eat it and get rid of it. So that is how antibodies respond to viruses. Now, I want to mention that natural immunity can happen, and natural immunity happens all the time when we are exposed to any disease. However, the first time we are exposed to something, it does take time for antibody levels to be produced. It takes time for those levels to build up. So the very first time you may have prolonged disease, more severe symptoms, it's just the case. It's just like that because we don't have the antibodies ready to go at that particular time. And people who are has less immune cells or who are immunocompromised, they may also experience more prolonged disease and more severe symptoms. And this is also the case for people who have preoccupied immune cells, and that's when an individual is already sick. And also if a person has dysfunctional cells, as in the case of people who have cancer, and those cancer cells are defective cells. So disease in these types of individuals can be more severe. So the vaccines are meant to speed up the antibody process, and it does this by falsely exposing our immune cells and tricking our immune cells to think that there's an infection. But these vaccines does not cause infection, and it cannot cause infection. And the only thing we may feel are side effects, and that is expected because we are being tricked. Our bodies is going on a test run. It's like a fire drill, and we are getting ready for the real thing. So now that you know how vaccines work and how antibodies work, I hope that you can now see how even the vaccinated can get infected. The virus needs time to be recognized by the antibodies that these antibodies are ready to fight it. So the virus has to make the first move in order for the antibodies to respond. Now, yes, even the vaccinated can get sick. They are just more prepared and they're ready for the fight, and they will win, especially if those antibody levels are boosted with a booster shot. So that's the purpose of a booster, to boost those antibody levels so you can have enough to fight off infections. Of course, as with anything in life, everything happens. Anything can happen, right? So we as scientists, we don't know every single outcome. That's why we have research, and that's why we are continuing to do research on COVID as well as every disease known to man. We have scientists that are dedicating their lives to do research on these diseases. So we update you on what we know as it comes. Now, let's get into some questions. Why do I need to get the vaccine if I already had it? Don't I already have antibodies? Yes, you do. But how much of those antibodies are present may vary based on the levels of infectivity. The vaccine normalizes those antibody levels to one that we know is effective in killing this virus. So another thing is that there's no way that we could tell everyone's antibody levels at the time that they were infected. So it is recommended that you are vaccinated so that everyone can have the same levels of antibodies. Next question. Why is everyone saying to get vaccinated for the ones that can't? Okay, this is a concept known as herd immunity, and that is when everyone around you are vaccinated and they are protected against different diseases. And because they're protected, they won't get sick, and that protects you because there's no one to get it from. And this is the case for immunocompromised people. This helps them, and it also helps our little babies who aren't able to get the vaccine. So, next question. It's too new. I'm scared and I don't want to take the risk. Okay, that is fine. We are all scared. But I like to say, do you really want to risk not being prepared for the actual coronavirus? And here's a similar question. What about the future? What would the vaccine do to me? I cannot say at this moment in time that we know. It's safe and effective at killing the virus. Right now, there's different controversy going around about fertility issues and heart failures and different things. I know the fertility issues, there's no fruition to that. There's no science behind that. But for the rare heart conditions, it's very rare. It's happening like 1 in 50 million. And people respond different to different things. So like I mentioned before, it's almost impossible for us to know every single outcome. It's just impossible for a human being to know everything. And I know that this vaccine is new and we are all very afraid at this moment, but I just gave you everything that I know about the vaccine, and I believe that it is safe based on the science. So I am not here to sway you. You take this knowledge and run with it how you see fit. Okay, so that is all that I have for today. I want to thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Yella. And remember to be progressive and to know the science behind the disease. Bye.